The Ivkai Empire had studied humanity from a distance for years before making contact. They watched Earth's glowing cities from orbit and noted how every human colony, ship, and station lit up the darkness like beacons. To the Ivkai, beings, shaped by generations of life in pitch-black tunnels deep beneath their homeworld, light was a weakness, not comfort. It gave away position, created shadows, and softened instincts. So when the time came to strike, they chose their most powerful weapon, absolute darkness. Without warning, dozens of human outposts across the stars lost power all at once. Entire systems were blacked out. No energy, no lights, no communication, no defense grids. Even advanced neural implants, which many humans relied on for navigation and combat, were scrambled by the Ivkai's blackout tech. Ships drifted powerless, bases fell silent, and panic spread across the colonies like wildfire. The Ivkai expected fear to paralyze their new enemy. They believed humans would crumble, blind and helpless in the dark. But they were wrong. Something unexpected began to happen. Where other species might have surrendered or fled, the humans adapted. In fact, something deep inside them awakened, something old. For countless centuries, humans had feared the dark because they knew danger could hide in it. But that fear was also a teacher. In prehistoric times, it had made them careful, alert, and clever. In cities, it led them to invent fire, torches, and streetlights. In space, it made them build machines to see what eyes couldn't. The Ivkai believed they had taken away humanity's tools. What they had actually done was bring humans back to their roots. Now, stripped of light, stripped of technology, people started relying on instincts. They moved quietly, spoke in whispers, and used touch, sound, and memory to navigate the silent halls of dying stations. Old survival skills returned. Soldiers trained in darkness drills took charge. Civilians formed groups and began organizing using taps, signals, and old-fashioned codes. The dark didn't break them, it sharpened them. At the edge of the Undari, Rim, one small listening post, Station Perseus 9, managed to survive the initial attack. The Ivkai sent scouts in, expecting no resistance, but the team never returned. Then another and another. Each group vanished into the black corridors, their last transmissions filled with static, confused murmurs, or quiet footsteps. Then, silence. The Ivkai grew uneasy. Their advantage wasn't working. Something inside the station was hunting them. Something that could see without seeing. Word spread fast across the Empire's high command. Humans were not reacting as predicted. On other darkened colonies, similar patterns emerged. The Ivkai would arrive, confident, invisible in the dark, and then they would disappear, taken out one by unseen hands. No lights, no alarms, just darkness and death. Back on Earth, military leaders activated hidden protocols built for worst-case scenarios. Ghost teams, elite human units trained for zero-light combat, were deployed to lost colonies. These were men and women who had trained blindfolded, fought in caves, learned to fight with every sense but sight. One of them was Commander Alara Voss, leader of Ghost Team 7, who was already en route to Juno 3, one of the first colonies hit by the blackout. Her orders: assess the situation, locate survivors, and strike back if possible. Voss had grown up in deep space and knew what it meant to fear the dark, but she also knew how to use that fear. As her ship entered silent orbit above the dead world, she looked down at the black surface with a calm expression. The enemy had turned out the lights, thinking it would weaken humanity, but they had made a mistake. They had brought humans into the one place they had been preparing for all along. The ship carrying Commander Alara Voss and her team descended into the shadow of Juno 3, a once busy mining colony now silent and cold. No lights flickered from the surface. No transmissions reached the stars. only the quiet hum of orbiting debris and the distant pulse of dying power relays. Voss stood at the ramp as it opened to pitch-black surroundings, her breathing steady, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't afraid. This was what she had trained for. Her team, Ghost Team 7, followed behind her, each one a shadow in motion. They didn't speak. Their suits had no glowing panels, no exposed tech. Every light source was covered, every movement measured. Voss gave simple hand signals, and the group slipped into the colony like water flowing into cracks. The hallways were thick with dust and silence, broken only by distant echoes, drips of water, the shifting of metal, the quiet memory of a once-living place. The darkness was not just around them, it was alive, heavy, pressing against their senses. But they did not use eyes to move. They counted steps, remembered turns, followed the faintest sounds. A hand brushed against the wall. A foot tapped once, on steel to signal a turn. Each step brought them deeper into the unknown. Somewhere within the colony, survivors might still be hiding. Voss knew that time was short. The blackout wasn't just an attack, it was a method of control. The HFY wanted to isolate, disorient, and then destroy. But if the humans inside had lasted this long, they were stronger than expected. As Ghost Team moved forward, they found signs. A trail of dried blood, a broken helmet, scratches on, a wall where someone had tried to leave a message. But what drew Voss's attention most was the silence. Not the kind that comes from emptiness, but the kind that holds its breath before something happens. She raised her hand to halt the team. They listened. Somewhere ahead, faint footsteps echoed, but they didn't sound human. The HFY were near. Creeping along the corridor ceiling, a scout drone shifted its limbs, almost invisible in the dark. Its alien sensors scanned for heat, movement, light, anything to confirm a target. But Ghost Team 7 had no heat. Their suits masked it. They made no sound. They didn't shine. To the HFY, it was as if no one was there. Then, in a blink, Voss moved. Her knife struck silently, the drone never able to scream. It dropped with a soft clatter. The others kept moving. Each hallway was a trap, every corner a new chance for attack. But they had trained for this. In simulations, they fought blind. In real missions, they moved without speaking. Now, in total darkness, they were ghosts among machines. The HFY had expected confusion, panic, a desperate scramble. What they found instead was precision. As the team reached the lower levels of the colony, signs of resistance grew clearer. Improvised barriers, marks where weapons had fired blindly, a small safe room sealed from inside. Someone had fought back. Voss approached the door, felt its surface, listened. A slow knock in a coded rhythm. Then silence. Inside, a quiet shuffle. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened, revealing 3 survivors, wide-eyed, exhausted, but alive. One of them, a boy no older than 15, held a heavy mining drill like a weapon. He looked at Voss not with fear, but with hope. She nodded once, then motioned for them to follow. This was no longer just a rescue. It was the start of something more. The HFY had believed humans could not fight in the dark, but Voss had come to show them the truth. In darkness, humans didn't lose their strength. They found it. And somewhere deep in the heart of this broken colony, she would uncover how the enemy had knocked out the orbital defenses, and how to take them back. The hunt had begun. The silence that once gave the HFY confidence had now become their enemy. Deep inside the dark halls of Juno 3, their patrols were vanishing. No alarms, no clear signs of a fight. Just silence, broken only by the strange, broken messages they received before contact was lost. The audio logs, played back by confused commanders, carried whispers. English words they couldn't fully understand, followed by a rising tone of panic, then screams, then static. The fear in those last moments wasn't caused by light or noise. It was something deeper, something even the HFY weren't prepared to face. Commander Alara Voss and Ghost Team 7 had become the hunters. The tactics of the enemy had been turned against them. Voss used the darkness like a tool, setting traps with sound, using empty helmets to lure scouts, and spreading false signals across the walls. Sometimes the HFY would chase a whisper only to find nothing. Other times, they would walk into a room and never leave. The humans didn't need light. They had patience, instinct, and the ability to move without being seen. But as the mission continued, even Voss began to notice that something strange was happening. Not just to her team, but to the survivors they had rescued. It started with small things. A young technician, barely out of training, moved through a completely dark hallway without bumping into a single wall. Another survivor, once terrified of small spaces, now felt calm in total silence. One of Voss's soldiers reported seeing a teenager sense an ambush before it happened, without any tools, without hearing a sound. It wasn't fear pushing these people forward anymore. It was something else. A new kind of awareness, something growing faster than training could explain. The deeper they went into the colony, the stronger these abilities seemed to become. Voss reviewed helmet recordings again and again, movements too accurate for blind guesses, reactions that came before danger arrived. It was almost as if these humans had begun to see the dark, not just survive in it. At first, she thought it was a side effect of stress or adrenaline. But the patterns were too consistent. The colony wasn't just a battleground. It had become a kind of testing ground, a place where human senses were changing. The HFY were reacting too. Their forces grew more cautious, no longer rushing into corridors. They started retreating from zones where their soldiers vanished. Some even abandoned their gear mid-mission and ran into the deeper tunnels. Voss could sense the shift. The enemy was afraid. That alone was strange. Until now, the HFY had never feared humans. They believed humans relied too much on machines and light. But now those machines were gone, and humans were adapting faster than logic should allow. At the edge of an old control station, Voss found a wall covered in hand-drawn maps and markings, made in chalk and dust. It wasn't her team's work. These were made by someone else, someone who had explored and mapped parts of the colony in the dark, without help. One of the survivors told her about the boy with the dark eyes, who never used a flashlight, who warned them of danger before it arrived, who always knew the way even when everyone else was lost. Voss felt a chill, not from fear, but from realization. Humanity wasn't just holding its ground. It was changing, improving, adapting to darkness faster than anyone thought possible. Later, in the silence of her private comm logs, she whispered a message back to Earth. "This isn't just survival," she said quietly. "Something is happening to us. We are learning to live in the dark, maybe even thrive in it." She didn't know how far this change would go, but one thing was becoming clear. The longer they stayed, the more the dark stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like home. Deep beneath the ruined surface of Juno 3, where power cables hung like dead vines and the air was still with dust and memory, Commander Alara Voss followed a strange trail, half human signs, half instinct, that led her to an old maintenance shaft sealed behind collapsed rock. It wasn't marked on any map, and the only reason she found it was a faint tapping sound, like coded knocks, coming through the wall. With her team's help, she cleared the path, and what she found beyond the debris changed everything. The tunnel opened into a wide underground chamber, once a geothermal control center, now transformed into a hidden shelter lit only by chemical strips too dim to reveal faces. But Voss didn't need light to sense the tension in the air. There were over a dozen people inside, miners, technicians, and even a few children. But they weren't just survivors. They moved differently, with smooth, precise steps, avoiding obstacles without looking. Their eyes barely blinked. Some never even turned their heads to see who was behind them. One of them, a thin teenager named Milo, stepped forward slowly, as if he already knew she was coming. He didn't carry a light, didn't flinch when hers flickered, and didn't seem surprised by her sudden appearance. Instead, he spoke calmly, his voice quiet but steady. "We've been waiting." Voss had seen many things in her career. People, pushed beyond limits, soldiers surviving under impossible odds. But this was different. The people in this room were calm, focused, and strangely aware. Their movements didn't come from guesswork or blind chance. It was as if they had built a new sense, one that worked without sight. Through careful questions and soft exchanges, she learned the truth. When the blackout first hit, the neural links most colonists relied on for direction, memory, and balance had been scrambled. At first, it caused chaos, but for some, especially those trapped underground, the brain began to rewire itself. Disconnected from artificial vision and digital guides, their minds returned to natural instincts buried deep in human evolution. Over days and weeks in the dark, those instincts didn't fade, they sharpened. Miners learned to use echo and airflow to detect open paths. Children stopped stumbling and began to move with ghost-like ease. Milo, the quiet boy with too sharp hearing, had developed something even more: an ability to sense shape, movement, and distance without using his eyes at all. He described the dark not as empty, but full of signals most people had forgotten how to read. Voss watched in silence as one of the survivors picked up a wrench from a table without looking, tossed it to another who caught it perfectly in the dark. There was no hesitation, no surprise. She realized they had become something new, neither soldier nor civilian, but something between. The HFY had thought they were crippling humanity by removing light and technology, but instead they had accidentally unlocked a hidden path in the human brain. The people here hadn't just survived without power, they had evolved. Voss stood next to Milo, watching him tilt his head slightly as he listened to the room, and she understood. The boy didn't fear the darkness. He belonged to it now. She remembered the silent patrols of the HFY, how they moved through, shadows thinking they were unseen. But now humans could do the same, and more. She sent a quiet message to command. The darkness was no longer a threat. It was a new battlefield, and humans were no longer learning to fight in it. They were becoming part of it. As Voss prepared to move deeper into the colony, she took Milo with her, not as a rescued survivor, but as a guide, a symbol of something greater. The war in the dark wasn't ending. It was changing, and humans were changing with it, faster than anyone could have imagined. The silence of Juno 3 was no longer a sign of fear. It was a warning. After discovering the hidden group of adapted survivors, Commander Alara Voss made a bold decision. She merged her ghost team with them, creating a new strike force unlike anything humanity had seen before. They called it Umbra, a name meaning shadow, and it fit them perfectly. These were no longer just soldiers or survivors. They were something in between. Ghost Team brought discipline, tactics, and training. The Darkborn survivors brought instincts, heightened senses, and a strange new connection to the darkness. Together, they formed a unit that could move through pitch black as if it were daylight. They didn't need lights. They didn't need orders shouted or screens flashing. They communicated through taps, gestures, and unspoken understanding. Voss led them into the heart of the enemy's strongholds, targeting HFY command nodes with quiet precision. Instead of brute force, they used speed, silence, and psychological pressure. They spread false signals to trick HFY patrols into thinking attacks came from the wrong direction. They planted decoys, used recorded voices, and turned every shadow into a possible ambush. The HFY, once the masters of the dark, found themselves hunted in the very space they thought gave them power. At first, the enemy didn't understand what was happening. Their soldiers disappeared, equipment failed, and command posts went silent one after another. They tried scanning for heat, for motion, for any sign of the human force, but Umbra left no trace. When they finally realized that humans were using the darkness as cover, panic spread through their ranks. The HFY leaders gave new orders: flood the battlegrounds with light. Powerful radiant flares were dropped into the tunnels. High-beam drones swept corridors. Even their own vision adapted. Scouts were blinded by the sudden brightness. They believed humans, trained in light and comfort, would retreat from the glare, confused and exposed. But nothing happened. The humans didn't run. They simply paused. Because for them, the darkness wasn't a weakness anymore. It was a weapon. And the light only broke the silence for a moment. When the lights flickered and the shadows returned, the strikes continued, faster, sharper, more brutal than before. The HFY soon learned the truth. Light didn't bring safety. It brought warning. When the lights were on, there was still hope, but when the lights went off, that's when the killing began. Voss used this fear like a tool. She ordered light traps, devices that flickered on for a few seconds and then died, causing confusion and panic in enemy squads. In one attack, Umbra used mirrors and broken glass to reflect faint light and disorient the HFY, making them fire at ghosts. In another, they moved silently through smoke and dust, so the HFY sensors couldn't lock on. Every strike was clean and quick, no wasted energy, no mistakes. The HFY began abandoning entire sections of the colony, fearing the shadows, more than direct combat. In reports intercepted by Voss, alien commanders described humans not as soldiers, but as phantoms. They spoke of glowing eyes that weren't real, of hearing breathing when no one was there, of darkness that seemed to move with purpose. They were losing control of the battlefield, and they knew it. For the first time in the war, the HFY were not just on the defensive, they were afraid. And fear, Voss knew, was the beginning of the end. In one final message before the next assault, she stood with Milo, the boy who could see in darkness, and addressed her team. "They thought they could break us by taking away the light," she said quietly. "But they only showed us who we really are." Around her, the members of Umbra prepared to vanish into the dark again, not as victims, not even as fighters, but as hunters born from the silence, stronger in shadows, faster in fear, and ready for the final strike. The HFY fleet hung above Juno 3 like a storm waiting to strike, their warships slowly aligning in orbit, preparing for one final act of destruction. Their commanders, frustrated and afraid, had decided to end the conflict in a single move, vaporize the entire colony from space, and then vanish, leaving no trace of the failure behind. They no longer believed they could win on the ground. The darkness had turned against them, their soldiers lost to silent enemies and unseen hands. But as they powered up their weapons and charged the main plasma cannons, unaware of what waited, beyond the black horizon, Commander Alara Voss was already moving. She had activated a last resort plan, something the fleet knew nothing about. It was called the Shadowfall Protocol, a coordinated space ambush crafted in total silence. Over the last 2 days, while the enemy focused on surface battles, Voss had worked with engineers and adapted survivors to prepare a trap hidden in the shadows of a nearby debris field. The area had once been a mining ring, filled with broken equipment, old cargo shells, and wrecked orbital stations. Now it was blacked, out, stripped of all signals and seeded with stealth mines, small, cold, and invisible to alien scanners. Each mine could tear a destroyer apart, but they remained dormant, waiting for just one trigger. Inside the black field, human ships floated like ghosts, powered down and silent. No lights, no heat signatures, no sound. Each one had a pilot trained to operate in manual mode, guided by touch and instinct. And above them, in a command module hidden between shattered hulls, Milo sat quietly, his eyes closed, listening. His mind was not seeing with sight, but through patterns of motion and sound, the faint hum of metal shifting, the distant pulse of enemy engines. He had become something more than human, a kind of living sonar, connected to the battlefield. Through low-frequency pulses and vibration sensors, he directed the team with taps and silent codes. Ships moved as he guided them, not with speed but with precision. Voss stood behind him, watching the boy work. He didn't need a screen. He didn't speak. His hands moved gently across a simple surface, sending messages through the shadows. The plan was simple. Let the HFY fleet enter the dead zone, searching for targets. Let them feel safe in the silence. And then, when they powered up their scanners to find the humans, let the minds respond. The moment came quietly. The HFY ships reached the edge of the field and began searching. No response, no signal. The humans were gone, or so they thought. One commander gave the order to activate full scans. Across the fleet, scanner beams lit up for the first time. That's when the minds woke up. One by one, across the dark field, explosions tore through the quiet. Fire bloomed in silence. Entire ships vanished in flashes of light. The remaining HFY vessels panicked, scattering in every direction. But the mines were everywhere, and worse. So were the human ships. Without power, without systems to detect them, the HFY had no defense. From the darkness, Voss's team struck hard, launching precise torpedoes and then fading back into the black. They didn't need lights to see. They didn't need computers to aim. They had become hunters in the void. Within minutes, half the fleet was gone. The rest tried to retreat, but the field had no way out. Only more silence, more traps, more shadows. When it was over, the debris field had grown larger, filled with broken alien steel and the echoes of a failed final attack. The colony remained untouched. In her final transmission to Earth Command, Voss gave only a few words. Shadowfall complete. The night belongs to us now. She looked at Milo, still sitting in silence, still listening to the stars, and knew that something had changed forever. Humanity had not just survived the war in darkness, they had mastered it. The battle ended without fanfare, without a single explosion shaking the sky. There were no cries of victory, no triumphant speeches. Only the silence of drifting wrecks, the remains of HFY ships now floating in the cold void of space, as still and lifeless as the blackness around them. The comm systems were down. The fleets had failed to send a single distress signal. The galaxy would never hear the desperate final attempts of the alien forces. What they would hear, however, was a message that spread across every star system, carried by quiet whispers through channels both human and alien. The humans had done it. They hadn't just survived the darkness, they had transformed it into a weapon, something the HFY never could have predicted. As news reached across the stars, the phrase, "afraid of the dark," began to circulate, an expression of fear that no alien species would ever dare to ignore again. It was no longer a question. It was a warning, a reminder that the dark was no longer the domain of the enemy, but the realm where humans ruled, where they had learned to thrive. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had once looked down on humanity as fragile, soft, and dependent on light began to change their minds. Diplomats, soldiers, even spies began to speak of the humans in hushed tones, unsure whether to see them as a threat or a mystery. And on Earth, where people once feared the night and turned on their lights for comfort, the air had shifted. Commander Alara Voss stood outside beneath a sky thick with stars, the night pressing in around her. The chill of the evening breeze felt nothing like the cold vacuum of space, but it was still a reminder of what had been achieved. There was no celebration, no crowd of people hailing her return. There didn't need to be. The victory had been fought in silence, and it was hers to savor alone. She looked up at the sky, her eyes tracing the constellations she had fought to protect. The victory wasn't just the destruction of the Ivkai or the survival of Juno 3. It was something deeper. It was the knowledge that humanity's greatest strength had never been in the light. It was never in the machines, the tech, or the warmth of a sun overhead. It was in the ability to walk through fear, to not only face the darkness but to use it, to move through it as though it were just another part of the world. And in that darkness, humanity had not only survived, but thrived. As Voss stood there, watching the night stretch infinitely above her, she smiled. The humans had become something the universe had not expected, creatures of the night, not afraid, not hiding, but hunting. And now, the darkness had a new name: humanity.